Hello.
Hello, what's up?
Okay, what are you doing right now? What are you doing right now? A puzzle? What are you
Yeah.
doing? Okay, well,
5,000 pieces.
it's not puzzle time. It's podcast time.
Oh, is that right now? Okay,
That-
I'll get on right now. Bye.
Okay, all right.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh
good.
yeah. What's going on? I'm ready.
Oh,
So we're going to talk to Michael Weber again. You know, he's a good friend.
Oh my! I mean, how do you think he's doing? I mean, what's going on? What's magic in the time of COVID? Honestly, I mean, what do you think's happening with him?
I don't know. I think it's going to be quite interesting to find out. I think he's got to figure out how to do magic on Zoom. It's going to be quite difficult.
It's more, what are the components of what is that thing that makes magic work in the environment, right? So, I mean, I'm just also, he's a pal. Come on, we haven't seen him in a while.
Be good to check in with him.
Always. All right. See you on there.
See you on there. How are you?
Good.
So, how do you do magic on video conferencing?
There's a ton of, you can't believe it. I'll bet there's more than 400 daily shows going on around the world of guys who are charging people for magic and mind reading shows over Zoom. They are legion.
Well, mind reading, I can imagine, works over Zoom because it's. I mean, how is, you know?
Wait a minute. Why are you imagining that?
I'm not sure work is the right word. I mean, these guys are doing it, but I think that absent the human connection, it's a diversion, not an entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about magic? I mean, how do you do illusions over with this screen in between us?
Well, you know, we've been moving towards something like that for a long time because many guys who wanted to perform close up to larger audiences, you know, Ricky did it by, I think, being brave and being smart and saying there's only going to be 180 people in the house and raking the stage and being very up close and kind of having that at its limit. But a lot of guys for many years, dating back to Doug Henning in those first TV shows, would bring a camera up close to show close-up magic on a screen to larger audiences. And the downside of that really is that now it's a dance of the hands and the face of the artist is missing and the face of the spectators are out of the frame. So now you're just watching the movement of objects. You're not watching any sort of human thing you could connect to.
You know, when we listen to Frank Sinatra and then you listen to rockabilly and then you listen to the Beatles and then, you know, on and on, you know, you're going through music undergoes a evolution over time. I don't know that's necessarily good, but does magic in the way that we look at magic undergo an evolution over time?
The answer is yes, that as the venues change, the places that people have access to, you think back to things like the beginnings of stadium shows. It was only a matter of time for magic acts to figure out that if they could gather a big enough crowd, that's a terrific thing to do, right? Why not gather 10, 20,000 people at once instead of, you know, audiences of 9 or 10 around the table or 1,000 in a theater. So
didn't Houdini have pretty big crowds?
He had big crowds for stunts, but in terms of ticketed performances, I don't think any place, you know, as big as it was, I don't think there were places larger than the Hippodrome or the London Palladium, which were those were the big venues of the time. But now we've got, you know, Dynamo was selling out the O2 in the UK. It's, you know, those places are.
You know, when I was a kid, you know, I went to see Doug Henning, you know, and he floated a light bulb off the stage, you know, and there's this beautiful illusion. You never see that one anymore. So it's like, do tricks come up and then they disappear and it falls into something else and keeps going? Like, how does it, I mean, and, you know, he's not really even remembered much anymore, is he?
By the general public, I don't think so. By magicians, he still is. Because he made important advancements in magic on television and that medium. And that was a trick that actually started off in the hands of Harry Blackstone Sr., who was performing it at a time when even light bulbs themselves were pretty magical objects. But yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen someone perform the floating light bulb.
Oh, it got retired. Michael, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I asked you this question last time, and it was about mentalism, but now I want to know, to your point around people are adapting, and there's 400 magicians out there. Do you need to be in a room with someone to read their mind, and like, you know, or can you now go into an audience that you have and kind of do it on Zoom? Like, what is that secret sauce? You have to be in the room, and you know, there's a whole thing about Zoom that you're not seeing the body. See, I'm making a lot of noise with my hands so you can see my kinetic energy, so you won't be just looking at my eyes, because you and I will never be able to make eye connection. Jesse and I might.
Not real eye connection, right?
So what happens?
So the good news is that the element of surprise is still what magic is all about. It is possible to do everything that you can do in a live show over Zoom, I believe, except quickly borrow an object. That takes longer, which is why the post office still really matters. And I think it's also difficult to really connect with the audience, because it's the same reason I've never been a fan of, I'm fine with magic being part of a story in film or on television, but I don't think magic on television is truly magical. And I've often made the association with the experience of magic being like the experience of food or sex, that there are big markets for both of those from a purely voyeuristic point of view, but to really experience those at the core and at the height of their experience, I think those are first-person experiences. And I think magic's exactly the same way. And I'd even argue that music is the same way, that there's just nothing like being in the room with the person that's making those airwaves vibrate in that way. You know, there can be fantastic music captured on every kind of media we can imagine, but I think being in the room is different. And so I've helped some people with their distanced shows, and I've over the past couple months adapted or developed some material specifically for distanced performance. But I think the people that are performing it are trying to modify what they do to fit the form, instead of really thinking about what the new form allows and then digging in deep to that, instead of saying, what did I used to do that I can still do at a distance? That's kind of where their heads are now. And what's much more interesting to me is, what can I do now that I could never do before? And one example is a friend of mine who's kind of doing corporate work, working, you know, he'll come in at the end of a meeting and do some light entertainment for the folks. We used to, you know, up to a couple months ago, we used to spend a lot of time on airplanes getting from job to job. And I know last week he had a Zoom meeting in San Francisco, a performance, and then one later that day back in New York City, and then one after that somewhere in the Midwest. And that's, you know, that just wouldn't be possible. But here he is kind of appearing live, but virtually at these things from place to place. So one of the things is it's permitted overcoming time and space in terms of distance. But I don't think anyone's really tapped into the connections of what that means, because I don't know what the inverse of the uncanny valley is, but there's something about all of these intermediary technologies with cameras and microphones and screens, and the whole process, the whole ritual of getting it set up. All of those things are informing us as we engage in those, that we're getting ready for something other than an ordinary face-to-face conversation and connection. And other things that we can take for granted, like this, you asked about earlier, we can't be sure what those things are going to really mean to us over time, right? So now our whole perspective is messed up.
What happened? What just happened? Come on. You figured it out, man. How you do that?
For the performer who's performing in LA, New York, and Chicago on the same day, the thing is that that's obviously an exciting thing. But if you're doing that every day and you're just in your house,
That's it.
does that fundamentally change the role of the magician in a way that somebody might not be attracted to doing that as their living now?
Well,
I mean, look, it's like, if I talk to my dad about performing, he's not going to perform in his house. It's like he's been on the road for 50 years. He's not.
yeah, but what I'm going to say is your dad's a smart cookie, but give him another 8 months of being boxed up and see if he doesn't think that one Zoom show is not permissible. No,
well, I'll let you. I'm pretty sure it won't be for him. But he's an exception. But we lost Priscilla. I don't know where she went. Maybe
she went to go get a giant pencil. She went to go get a giant pencil.
I can't hear you.
A loud noise in the back of my house. So I was like, please, what's happening?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that.
But does it change it, Michael, do you think?
I don't think we've been at it long enough to have an evidence-based answer to that, but my suspicion is one of the reasons people are attracted to magic in general and entertainment, or magic specifically in entertainment in general, is they love surprise. They love the escape. They love the surprise. They like something different. Mixing it up, whether it's a magician or a singer or a juggler or whatever that is, even a salesperson. I think for a lot of these guys, they're hungry to perform. That's what they do. That's what keeps them going. But I know that it is, you're not getting real-time feedback from those audiences. No one has figured out sound over these yet, because ambient noise works very differently in a theater or a meeting room than having everybody be in close proximity to the microphone, so that every little whisper is at the same level as whoever's speaking at the moment and everyone else is listening to. And the challenge of that is it has been traditional up to this point. We've only got 5-6 months of experience, but folks have been shutting off their microphones and connecting and communicating within the rooms while they're watching these performances. But that means that at the end of something, usually when you get to hear some sort of response from the audience, whether that's applause or a deep gasp or all sorts of excited whispers and mumbling, whatever that is, there's nothing. The performer has just got the room sound, and looking at a dozen tiny faces, maybe that gives them some sense that the audience is enjoying themselves. But those, these interfaces so far have been designed for the most fundamental levels of human connection and communication. So all those other things that have been built up over years of experience in theater, of physical proximity and the group experience and, communal sound, and everybody's light being the same. If you're watching something, no matter how moody the lighting is in the performance space, if the people have full lights on in their room, you've got this disconnect between the space you're watching and the space you're in. It's like not, at home with a big screen TV, whether you dim the lights or not, it's going to have a big difference in how immersive that experience is.
And I want to throw something out there. First of all, Jesse has been talking to a group of comedians, and how to have good experiences. And to that point, the comedians can't hear the laughter. But what if everybody just turned their mic on, right? We've all become very, adherent to these principles. You turn your mic off when you're not talking. However, I would say to you, we interviewed someone about Shakespeare a couple of years ago, and that was call and response, right? So if we all had our sound, if we had our things, like when you threw that pencil out, I screamed, I turned my mic off because I was shocked, and I want you to know that shocked me. What is that going to be like something that could happen? What do you think, Jesse? Like people will just.
I mean, what do I think? I think that it's like the early days of cinema where we don't know what a cut is, and we don't know So I think that if this present conditions persist, we're all going to have to find ways of making this kind of experience more rewarding. I mean, I think it's interesting because magic does have a lot of similarities to comedy, yeah, in that, a joke is like a routine in a sense, isn't it?
It is. They're both incredibly dependent upon familiarity and surprise, right? It's that great Steve Martin joke he did on The Tonight Show about he had just worked for a group of plumbers and at a plumbers convention, and he wrote a special piece of material that he wanted to share with everyone. And he tells a plumbing specific joke about a pipe wrench and the wrong size fitting and a guy bringing the wrong size wrench in. And one can imagine it's just great because it's such a well thought out joke and an exploration of insider humor, right? And that you can have something that is so right and so specific, but if it's the right thing for the wrong audience, it just sounds ridiculous. And it was that mismatch that made it so funny. And I think we're going to be approaching this. It's going to be harder than cinema, because with cinema, we already had theater goers. So they already understood the basic rules and fundamentals of theater. So cinema had to adapt much more to, right? So when you think about that, we would go into the same box, into the same theater, sit in the same seats facing the same direction, looking at that closed curtain in that proscenium stage. But this time when the curtain opened, instead of we were looking at a wide open stage, we were looking at a flat two-dimensional screen with a projected image on it. But all the other rules still applied and still worked. This is, the technology is moving in one direction. Our experience with it is moving in a different direction. Sometimes there's an intersection, sometimes there's a clash. And I don't think anyone, I'm working with two other guys in the UK for designing some entertainments that are doing that thing I was talking about earlier, really focusing on these distanced experiences and what those allow for. And my mental model for this has been, it's much closer to radio than television.
Why?
When you think about what was capable in terms of us just having those sounds and voices come in and weaving those tales and those spells for us, I think if we can get very good and augment it with the visuals instead of relying so much on the visuals, it's my guess that we're going to be able to move closer to something new and really interesting for audiences.
Is there a difference between magic and mentalism in terms of this medium? What is a mentalist?
A mentalist is a term that we believe was coined by a performer, probably by the husband of a performer named Pearl Tangley. It was a completely made up name, and she would do readings from the stage. Her husband was a quack doctor that had his own cancer cure clinic in Muscatine, Iowa, which was known as the Pearl Button capital of the United States, if not the world. And I've got a really great glass ashtray downstairs from the Weber Pearl Button Company in Muscatine, Iowa.
Of course.
And this guy was also one of the very early US pirate radio broadcasters. So he was a really, really interesting fellow. And there was a kind of a self-help movement called Mentalism, which was very much about positive thinking and about mentally envisioning things first and focusing upon them and then manifesting those in the real world. And he liked that word mentalism and then adapted it in a way to coin the term mentalist and called his wife, his first of two Pearl Tangley wives, who he toured around with. And I don't have it. I'm still chasing it. There's this big, beautiful old wood and leather steamer trunk with brass fittings.
Right.
That has the name Pearl Tangley on the top. And it was intended to be the thing that they would travel with the act and their clothes in it. It's huge. But it also had a brass plate with a slot in it that was used so that at the beginning of the the experience, when you came into the theater and the curtain was still closed, at the front of the stage, at the foot of the stage, was the steamer trunk with her name on it, and you would write your question and fold it up and drop it inside that slot in the trunk. And she would then acquire answers from her source, from the great beyond. So she wasn't the oracle, she was just someone who was gifted to connect with the oracle. So that's where the term mentalist comes from, we believe.
Geez, I thought that they'd been doing, but the routines go back much further, don't they? Don't they?
They
aren't
go
very
back
old?
they go back to the Oracle of Delphi.
Yeah.
There were, there are historical descriptions of people inscribing their question on a small tablet, slipping it under the stone door of the temple at Delphi, and that the oracle inside would then slide a tablet out with your answer from underneath it. And I think what has changed over time, and where the term mentalist came from, is both the intention of the performer and the intention and understanding of the audience of what they were coming for. And very early on, and for many centuries, probably up until the end of, a little bit after the end of World War I, after the big spiritualist movement, people were coming for real answers. And then at some point, it became offered as an entertainment instead of as an oracular experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when we started to see more performances of mentalism as entertainment. And it's crazy, when you think about it. A mentalist is someone, up until now, a mentalist has been someone on stage who makes these bold claims, and then almost their entire performance is proof of those claims. And one of my criticisms of traditional mentalism performances has been, if this was a superhero, we get to see their origin story, we get to hear stories that they can, leap higher than the tallest building and faster than a speeding locomotive. But you don't spend the whole rest of the story proving over and over again that they can really do these things. At some point, you put those skills to the test and do something useful or entertaining or interesting or of some utility. And most mentalism acts, not unlike most magic acts, are a performer who comes on stage and makes one of these miraculous claims, and most of the act is entertaining but false proof of the false claim.
I have a question.
What were we going to say, Priscilla?
Yeah, well, only because just will make fun of this. I have a very close friend who is a very well-known psychic.
Oh God.
But I'm distinguishing psychics from mentalists, because I think
No. I'm not. This is different. She's a psychic, and I'm. My question is, Jesse, stop that. My question is that we were talking. She said that right now there's 150% increase in people wanting to go to psychics. By the way, she's retired, Jesse. Don't worry. Wake up. And this idea of, at some point, people were coming to ask, the truth about something actual. It was a real thing as opposed to entertainment. Now, in this very unknown time,
that's it. That's everything. It's every time we as humans reach these places of high levels of uncertainty and unpredictability, I believe as a life form, humans become open to a broader range of possibilities of places to find answers to those questions. And that's really what the boom of spiritualism and mentalism was. When you take a look at when it really took off, you had all these people who had sent fathers and sons and husbands and lovers to war who didn't come back, or from whom we had no word. And that vast, unanswerable, unknowable uncertainty meant that maybe they had to go to some place or someone who was in touch with things that were equally unknown and unknowable to them for answers or for comfort. So those very early, they were called Q&A, question and answer shows. People went to those for therapy. People went to those for answers. And a lot of those early seances were exactly the same, right? It was an attempt to contact people who had passed on.
So what did it mean? you know, when Houdini started going to the seances and exposing them, like was that a turning point in what was going on?
There were other debunkers and exposers at the time. Houdini was surrounded by lots of believers, people like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock Holmes, one of the most rational fictional figures of English literature.
Right up until the moment he saw those fairy images.
Well, see, now I think if he had seen those images in the book that they were cut out of and placed in the garden before he saw them in the garden. But look, what we're talking about is exactly the same thing. Photography, even back then, was a very magical process with the spirit photographs of the time, being able to, and I don't criticize those folks so much for their, I would consider it at the time more open-mindedness than gullibility. So you think about Houdini. One of the people he really set his sights on was a woman named Crandon. Her mediumistic name was Marjorie. She was married to a very prominent physician. There was kind of a board of well-known and respected professors and scientists, men of science, who would sit in judgment of new scientific claims that were submitted to Scientific American. So this wasn't just a magazine for the newsstands, this was a journal at the time. And when you think about this period of time and what else was going on in science, the idea that at the same time in history, imagine someone came to that board and said, I can put a person in a room and point a magical light at them, and I can see the bones inside their flesh without cutting that flesh. And you'd think, okay, this is another crackpot. But this was Roentgen with the beginnings of what we would then know as the X-ray. And one of Houdini's brothers was a physician in New York City who was one of the early users of X-rays, and would actually submit Houdini to a lot of X-ray experimentation. And there's some speculation that the reason his brother, I think it was his brother Leo, and Houdini might have both ended up sterile because of submitting to these X-ray experiments of his brother in his house. But think about that, right? Is it any crazier at this time of kind of burgeoning electricity, right? The idea that energy and light is traveling over these wires, and we've got communication by wire, and now we've got the beginnings of the telephone industry, and radio is now becoming stronger. Upton Sinclair, the author that wrote The Jungle, also wrote a book called Mental Radio. So you've got these people that are respected in one field examining another field saying, is it so crazy to speculate that maybe the same waves that we're sending out that are creating sound, or the waves that are waves of light that we're using to see, or the physical kinesthetic waves that we feel when we touch something that move through our body? Is it so impossible to think that maybe that when we think something with enough intention, that we're sending out thought waves that could be picked up by someone else, not unlike our radio technology with no visible connection between the two? The message that leaves the broadcast station is received almost in perfection at the receiving station and can then be heard, and we can adjust the volume and we can tune the channels. So when I think back to this time when folks were really caught up in this and examining it, I don't think it's so crazy. I don't think it's so crackpot at the time, because so many other impossible at the time, impossible to imagine things that were happening, that I think folks were open to this kind of stuff. And now imagine that we have someone that wants to take advantage of that openness and combine it with the sensitivity of someone who wants to speak to their deceased wife or their deceased father, or the son that they lost in the war and never got a chance to say goodbye to. If you've got someone that is very good at using what were essentially theatrical techniques in a darkened room to create really believable physical and audible manifestations of this person, it's not so hard to understand why people got so caught up in this. So now you've got the board of the Scientific American offering many thousands of dollars to anyone that can offer irrefutable proof of their contact with spirits from the other side, or some sort of ability to regularly pierce the veil. And you've got these spiritualists coming out and, you know, testing their mettle, and maybe they're going to be the one. And many of them, from what I've read, I never met any of the folks from the early 1900s, but I think many of them kind of had a bifurcated mindset about this. I think that they believed that what they were attempting to do was possible, but that they hadn't yet cracked the code or the process or the right ritual to make it happen. So that they wanted to put on a good show for the folks in the room. And I'm sure there were also absolute con men and con women and charlatans that were just out to bilk people. But my guess is that there were some folks who would try to be in touch with their intuition and tell you what they felt was the answer from the other side, but they might also at the time rely on some other more magical theatrical effect technology to put on a good show.
So magical thinking as opposed to, right? Like, in other words, Jesse is such a sinner. He's like Ricky over there with psychic. You and Ricky together with psychic.
Well, I hate to tell you this, but Michael's over here with me too. So
okay, so Michael's over there. I'm right in the middle, and I love magic, and I believe in intuition, and I think there is maybe another way to know. Just like you just said, the radio waves are, you know, who would have thought? Who would have thunk it, right? That you would.
So that's okay. So does that? What is the importance of Amazing Randy when we have somebody who believes something like this, that there's some middle ground?
I'm not sure Amazing Randy with the guy, you know, I might not pick him to be my psychic buster. Not that any of us has to be perfect in every way, but if you go back, I think there has been a challenge since the 1970s in the skeptical movement. Because if you go back to the early Greek of what skeptos really means, it's this equal challenging of all offered possibilities. But what has happened is we have ended up with a much more cynical version of that, where the two great comments about it, not mine, one was that the existence of toupees does not disprove the possibility of real hair. So I think it's disadvantageous. It's disadvantageous in any research to go in looking for a specific answer. You know, that's what double-blind tests are all about. And I think Jesse and Priscilla, you both have done enough in the science and medical field to know that testing's hard. Testing's really hard because all throughout the process, we've got humans engaged in the process, deciding on how to set up the research design and deciding what things to look for and how we're going to determine whether or not we see those, and then what those results actually mean, and what will we go back and look at again, and what are our levels of confidence and to what degree. And we as humans suffer deep innumeracy. We believe we have an innate sense that we understand how statistics operate, but we don't. We're so wrong about it. And it takes effort to learn and understand and study those fields, and they're non-obvious.
That's what mentalism can take advantage of, yeah?
It can in a way. It absolutely can in a way. Magic can as well. You know, a lot of the scientist and the magician, right? The scientist wants to find something new, and he wants to discover and share the underlying mechanism. The magician loves to find exactly the same types of gaps in human understanding and awareness, but to keep those concealed to produce an experience.
Makes me think about that movie. I think you worked on it, the one where The guy, they're twins. The magician
yeah.
has twins. What was that one called? I forget.
Yeah, that was a Christopher Nolan film called The Prestige.
Yeah, The Prestige, where the one guy's a magician, he just has a brother goes through, and then the other guy actually creates, a science fiction event to make, a time travel thing where he kills himself at the end of each thing. It's quite it sort of illustrates the thing you're talking about, the differences between science and illusion.
It's a lot of things. I mean, to me, the most interesting thing about that is the truest thing about that is that those two characters, that what they represented from the original Priest story, short story, the Prestige, the Hugh Jackman performer was the charismatic performer, someone good looking. You'd be happy to watch this guy on stage, whether he was singing or dancing or doing magic tricks. And magic was the vehicle that got the audience to look at him. Whereas the other character, the Christian Bale character, there was no price he would not pay to realize his magic. And what happens over time is, through finding a set of notebooks and connecting with Tesla, the more charismatic Hugh Jackman character ends up going down the rabbit hole where he's now going down the same path that the Bale character was going down, where he's willing to literally not just risk his life, but literally sacrifice his life, show after show after show after show, to create the effect. So, but I usually have a copy within arm's reach, but I don't right here. There was a fantastic little book called The Mad Book of Magic, written by all the editors and artists of Mad Magazine. It came out when I was a kid, I think in the late 60s, early 70s. And that book changed, the contents of that book changed while I owned it. Because the first time I read through it, it had crazy things in it, like the terrific Mad Magazine cartoon drawing styles of, it followed the form of a magic book. So it showed you an effect, and then when you turn the page, it explained the method to produce that effect. And the effect was the magician borrows a watch, and then the watch vanishes from his hand, poof, and it's in his other hand. And then you turn the page, and the method is a trained army of ants drags the watch up his sleeve, across his chest, and down his other sleeve to his other hand. Or a knife is shown, placed against the hand's open and it clings to the hand. You turn the page, and the method is the blade slips out of the hilt, revealing two razor sharp points that are pierced into the flesh of the palm so that the knife will not come out of it. And the whole book is full of what the writers and artists, clearly thought were the most outrageous possible methods. And the truth is, and the reason that book changed as I owned it, as the more I read about the lengths to which magicians would go to produce their effects, there is, I think there's maybe only one proposed crazy method in that book that isn't unintentionally a real method magicians have tried before, including piercing their flesh, the use of tiny insects, clothes with an unbelievable number. One of the things was a spectator from the audience names a playing card, the magician reaches in his pocket and he's got that card. And the method that the reveal on the next page is his jacket is open and there's 52 pockets, one for every playing card on each side. That is not exactly a method, but the idea of many, many more places to get a thing hidden in plain sight that audiences are unaware of, the magicians are accessing, is a thing that's existed for as long as we've been writing magic up in books and explaining it to fellow magicians. So one of the things that's so crazy and appealing about magic is, like a lot of scientists, there's nothing we won't try to bring about the effect. You know, there's people who've blown fingers off and electrocuted themselves and been unintentionally buried alive and been shot on stage. Chung Ling Soo and another 13, maybe now 15 people have been shot on stage trying to perform the illusion of catching or stopping a bullet on stage. You know, how can you not love a community of people that are willing to do so much to bring about those effects for their audiences?
Why is there a world in which we're having this debate around science again? Is it we want to believe in magic? What is that?
Boy, I wish I had a non-depressing answer. I was reading something interesting the other day that talked about, I think there's a couple of things to look at. I know that Jesse and I have discussed many times before the notion of the confidence trickster and the confidence man, the con man. And that expands to notions of knowing and not knowing, and the idea of knowledge and the concealment of knowledge, or the secret use of knowledge for either entertainment purposes or for nefarious purposes. And a lot of that goes back to belief, and it starts getting really sticky when people get to a place where, why do we believe a thing? Why do we have faith in a thing? And often we believe in a thing when we've had first-person experience. But I don't think our lives are long enough for us to have a high enough level of utility with all the accumulated human knowledge if we actually had to go back to doing each of those fundamental beginning tests for ourselves, right? If you look at mathematics, after you've got some established proofs, you can use that really dense, difficult understanding that's already been established as building blocks to then achieve some higher level of understanding that the human life is probably not long enough to accomplish if we had to go back and deconstruct all of those every single time we wanted to discover a new thing. But I think that over time, what that has done is we have become further and further distanced from firsthand experience. And I think that has both distanced large parts of the population from a sense of responsibility, from a sense of connection, and all the things that means, positively and negatively. And I think I see people moving away from things that are hard, from things that take time, from things that are challenging, from things that don't work the first time. And growing up in magic, the idea that you're going to practice this thing, you know, at a minimum for 10 years before you're going to take it out of the house because it's just not going to be worthy. The idea of that kind of investment in something, hoping that you stay interested and you get a good enough idea to do something with it over that period of time. So many of our technologies are making remarkable things available to us with the touch of a button, right? Look at all the stuff we're doing now with these technologies, where all we're doing is buying things and plugging them into each other and clicking on apps and all of these remarkable levels of connection or possibility. But we don't really know what's happening on the back end of any of these things. And if we had to understand all of the things that were just making this level of communication possible, we probably could barely live long enough to actually use it if we had to understand all of it. So there's implicit trust in that. Combine that implicit trust in utility with folks not wanting to put the time in to look at the hard stuff. People also aren't so thrilled about being wrong. So if you learn too much, or you read the wrong thing, or you have some first person experience with something that really transforms what you thought was right, or what you thought was true, or what you thought was real, those are life changing, path altering experiences. And some people just kind of love living in the fire hose of that new experience and of change and of new ideas and new things. But a lot of folks are kind of, I was going to say, the interesting thing I read last week was that anger primarily is rooted in fear. That an anger response is comes from, at its core, at its root, some sort of fear. And when you think about that, and you think about how much anger we've seen recently, to make that connection in your head and understand that that's really the expression of fear, it changes my understanding of what we're looking at. And now we have to go back to do very, very real, fundamental things to not just say, but show other humans that we support them, and that we're, that we don't all have to think the same thing to live in the same communities, that it's okay to have different ideas, and we don't have to start parceling people apart or measuring them by different means.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, Michael, that was great. Thank you again.
Michael, we could, we miss you. It's so wonderful. It's really wonderful just to hang out with you, even if we're in this weird thing that we're in. Thank you for all that thinking too, which means that we'll be calling you back again. We never have enough time with you. We never have
I think
enough.
we have to be doing our homework right now, right? We're not shaving or getting our hair done, but
Right.
we should absolutely be learning a foreign language or two and reading all those, I can't in good conscience tilt the camera and show you how many stacks of books surround me that I've maybe only read 10 pages in, or I've got a big steel work table right here. And my rule is every new book that comes in the house, it stays on the table until I've looked at every page. But that doesn't mean read every page. But there's still big, big stacks of books. Carl Reiner book. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. So when on the days when it gets really tough, I just give myself more homework, and then suddenly there's not enough time again, which I think is what the truth of all of it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Love you guys. Treat science like it's real. Imagine it's real. Treat it like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretend that.
Well, that was good. Michael was good as always.
I always learn something. How about the ability to, talk about mentalism, his ability to recall these quotes and details. What kind of brain does that? Not mine, and definitely.
Oh, you don't think so? Well, his does.
I don't think that you have that ability.
Okay.
I do not. And I also have to say, he got me with that pencil. I don't know something was odd, but did you think that's what it would be?
I didn't. I thought it was a wonderful illusion.
All right.
Okay.
All right, well, I'll see you later. I'm glad you were sitting up for this one.
Okay.
I almost was laying down, and you have some gardeners in your backyard, so did I, but.
I understand. It is fine.
All right.
Okay. I'll talk to you later.
See ya.
See you in the next podcast. Bye.
See you on the next podcast.